Late than never, applying for a Veteran of the War of 1812 grade side marker. And this turns out to be through my third great-grandfather, Peter Young. His dad was Daniel Young, who was a Butler Ranger, and that's who I have my UE certificate through. His father, Adam Young, was also a Butler's Ranger. I haven't done the paperwork for that. I would say it all sort of started in January of 2014, and it sort of came out of the research for the Daniel Young article for our branch book about the War of 1812 people. Originally planned to get the OGS Society of the War of 1812 certificate, but to get that you have to, they would love you to have marriage certificates for everybody back. Well, that's just not going to happen. It hasn't, nobody's found them yet for a couple of our Youngs that got married. And so instead of digging and begging, and I became a grandfather, so things got changed. I haven't got around to that yet. So and there was also a problem too, that there were too many Peter Youngs. Which one was mine? And what ended up happening through this process, I'll let you know how I figured out that I'm as sure as I can be at this point that the one I've got is really the guy. In June of this year, Sharon Dell of the Heritage Arts Legacy of Fort Erie group did a lot of stuff on Facebook. They were promoting how their group had researched 40 veterans in the Fort Erie area of the War of 1812. And her heritage group decided to research them. It wasn't somebody like me doing it on a relative. It was this group doing on these people. And then sort of the other way around, once they had them proven, they were putting out the call, please, if you're related to these people, could you come to the presentation? We'd rather have a relative be involved than us who just did the research for the group for that area. So, and they ended up doing 40 of them. And at that point, I was trying to find out a relative of mine, Christian Risley, who ends up being Peter's father-in-law. He is buried in the Anglican Church along the river in Fort Erie. He has been recorded as being a captive during the War of 1812, but I haven't found anything that said he was a soldier. Now, whether, sometimes it starts somewhere, and before you know it, you have the same phrase in 6 different spots, but nobody ever tells you where they get the information from. And so I never did get Christian Risley figured out. Maybe more on that in the future. So this is what it's all about, is getting a hunk of granite with this etched in it. And it's the War of 18 veteran, and there's 2 sides of a coin. And this coin had an interesting history. Through this program, Canadians will be able to apply for granite plaques to be placed at a veteran's grave. Each plaque will be a replica of the Upper Canada preserved metal etched into its surface. The original Upper Canada preserved metal was produced after the War of 1812, but very few were actually awarded. They only ended up having 3 that continued in existence. And I guess my sarcasm here would be, it was a bureaucracy thing, and they couldn't get their act together, and as a result, sort of almost nothing happened. I have a little more detail on that. The website is going to identify all the grave sites of the people who go through and do this. After my presentation, I'll sort of navigate around in the website so you can see what it's like. And in the website, there will be the biographies of every veteran who ends up getting one of these plaques, and it's going to be a useful database for students in the future. And they have produced at least 1,000 of these plaques, are expected to be delivered, to be distributed across the country. I did email last Sunday the site and say, hey, I'm doing this presentation Thursday night. Please get back to me. How many have you done so far? all I can say is that I was, Peter was veteran number 317, and that was in around Thanksgiving time. I don't know how many have been done since then, and I didn't count all the ones on the site. So we're very pleased that the federal government ended up seeing fit to give money for this program, says Lynn Downer, who is the chair of the Southern Georgian Bay War of 1812 Bicentennial Committee. It represents the first time in our history as a nation that we will honor the rank and file of the War of 1812 veterans, veterans who with their courage and their strength and character and resolve formed a company, formed our country. At Fort York, they actually have a replica of this, and they're very proud to even have that. And on one side was a laurel and wreath, which ends up saying for merit, which is this side. And I do have the actual plaque here that you can look at later, so you can see it up close and personal. So that was one side, was the laurel. On the other side represents a stylized map of the Niagara River. On the right is the U.S., and side is the waterway, with a flustered American eagle flapping its wings. Across the border, on the Canadian side, we have the industrious Canadian beaver, working away peacefully, protected by the British lion who sits and ready to pounce should the eagle try to come over. So obviously it was from the Canadian point of view. And there's the words Upper Canada Reserve are on it, and the one that they have at Fort York is a reprinting, restamping in 1910, and I think one of the references I gave you there, if you're into collecting medals and stuff, there's a whole history that even the stamped ones are very rare. What ended up happening is that this whole idea came out of the Loyal and Patriotic Society, which ordered the medals during the War of 1812. They destroyed all but 3 of them in 1840, and even those were of a different pattern. Article I read this week, basically there was all sorts of infighting as to what design would be the one that they'd actually use, and so this is why they picked this. So Daniel was a captain of the 5th Lincoln, and the oldest son, Daniel Jr., we find him as an ensign in the 1804 militia, but we haven't found him in any militia record muster rolls. Now we know that they all didn't exist to continue on. Most of them have. I'd still like to do a lot more work with the 2nd York, which would take their soldiers out of the Trafalgar Township area, where I believe that Daniel Young got his United Empire Loyalist grant. So he was there, at least I have a Daniel Young there, very near to where Peter and his wife Hannah had UEL grants. And that's another thing for me to research. So the Peter that I'm related to was born in 1784, and he was born in Waterloo Ferry, which is now Fort Erie, and that kind of probably all works together because Daniel's wife was Elizabeth Windecker, and the Windecker, Henry Windecker, ran the ferry. So they're all closely related. Of course, Windecker was a UEL along with Daniel as well. So there's another Peter Young, and he's in the 2nd Lincoln with Captain Askins. He ends up being a nephew of this Captain Young, or my Peter Young's cousin. And that seemed like the logical guy that should have been my Peter, but he wasn't because they weren't living there at the time. There's also another Peter Young who's in the 1st Lincoln Flank Company. That's Niagara on the Lake area. No relation. And another son, Henry, he's with the 5th Flank, Lincoln Flank Company. There's an Adam, that's with the 2nd. There's George, there's Frederick, and then the young guys, they were too young to be in the war. So the part that bugged me was the rest of them, except for Daniel, the son Daniel, they were all over the militia records. why wasn't Peter? He was of the right age, so he should have been there. And a little bit of a travelogue. This is a 1777 map. Basically, the Youngs came from Germany with the Palatines, then they went to the Hudson River, and then after that they went to the Mohawk River and Valley, and then after the war, because Adam and his, some of his brothers, and some of his sons, maybe a more famous one would be Captain John. He was more involved with the Indians, that being the proper term during those decades. Anyhow, they all moved from that area because they fought for the British, and Adam, actually, who's the grandfather of the person I'm talking about, because he was a ranger and old, he was originally sent in the Niagara on the Lake area to start farming to raise food for the troops. When Joseph Brant got his grant for the lands here, Joseph Brant and Adam Young and Daniel and John, they were all friends and they worked well together in the Mohawk Valley. And Adam did a lot of trading with the Mohawk Nation. So they were buddies, and Young got a grant on the lands that the Six Nations were granted near Caledonia, near York, in that area along the Grand River. Well, Peter's father, Daniel, didn't like the idea that he wasn't married to a native. He didn't like how this was, how he could see it going in the future. But because they were on the land on a Brant lease, and he just said, hey, if I apply and get my grant as a United Empire Loyalist, I can have my own land, and then I know it's mine, and I don't have to worry about this. So he left the Grand River and went to Barton, and he continued to grow his family there. In 1806, Peter marries Hannah Risley, and then they apply for their UEL grants, because Hannah was the daughter of Christian Risley and Hannah Sipes, and those two names are also United Empire Loyalists themselves. So Hannah got the grant as a daughter of a Loyalist, Peter got the grant as the son of a Loyalist, and I end up finding them in Trafalgar Township. And that's why it made sense that Peter was on one muster roll for the 2nd York, because they gathered them from all there. But what didn't make sense was why only one? They should have been out numerous times. Why only one? Well, there's a lot of things that sort of add into conclusions. And what happens, strangely enough, it brings me to Essex County. And at first you kind of go, why would he go from near Oakville, Glen Abbey Golf Course? It's pretty close to where the lands they had. In 1807, 1808, they are on the land registering, that's getting the land from the Crown. About 3 years later, they flip it and sell it. And so they made some money because they got it for free. But it doesn't say, then he went to Essex. It just, you have no idea where he went. There's an index of the land claim certificates for the Upper Canadian militiamen who served in the War of 1812 to 14. Wilford Lauber went through and put every person that applied for a land grant because they worked in a flank company, or there's another group of companies, not just your regular militia. They didn't serve enough to get the free land, but the flank companies were almost like full-time soldiers. They did. There was a Peter Young there, but again there was a Peter Young in Essex, and other family researchers that I worked with, we don't have anybody in Essex. Nobody was around there. Well, he's there. And then through, I think it was Cheryl Bowman, or someone gave her the book, Taken and Destroyed, The War of 1812, Losses, Claims, London and Western District, Upper Canada, by Glenn Stott, and I have that listed as a resource. The branch has it, it's in St. Catherine's Library, and as I was going around the executive table that night, and Sharon, you'll have privilege to all this high-level stuff now. And if I hadn't been sitting there that night, I wouldn't have leafed through it and found Peter Young in Essex County. And he has a claim, because his gun was stolen, his sword was stolen, his belt was stolen, his house was burnt down, and the stables were burnt down. And the other part that's a real quandary to me, and they took his horse. Well, if they took his horse, I'm assuming somebody had to be at the place to feed the horse. The other stuff they could have just stolen and nobody lived there anymore, because when they made the claim in May of 1814, that whole western area was occupied by the Americans. And they didn't like anybody's farm that was connected to serving with the militia. It was an extra way of saying, well, we're going to get you. And if we're going to burn down a farm, it might as well be somebody that's involved with the militia than somebody over here that doesn't have anybody serving. So there's another connection, and that proved to be a very important connection, which you'll see later. Bev and Rod Craig were very helpful in giving lots of books called about the new settlement. And it was established by William Caldwell, who was a former military boss. I forgot, trying to think of the right term. Basically, he was Daniel Young's boss during the Revolution. So there's a connection. And also, Caldwell was a Butler's Ranger. And after the war, they wanted Caldwell to start this settlement down in Essex County to protect the border with Detroit. And they wanted a good presence there. So hey, take down a whole bunch of Butler's Rangers, give them the land grants there. They'll know how to fight, they'll fight for us, and then, you know, if we have trouble with the Americans, they'll be our group. Well, it didn't go as well as they'd hoped. Some of the Butler's Rangers stayed, others they sort of flipped it and they went somewhere else. Because it was a very secluded area. Most of the rest of the country in between, there were very few settlements. Well, that led me to, and I forget the name of the book, but it basically has to do with an academic describing how land was changing hands and how people made profit during the early 1800s in Essex County. And again, there's another P. Young, who was a renter, and then led me to the Ontario Archives, and Peter Young shows up on the Colchester and the Malton Township assessment rolls. About 1819 is the first one, to 1830. And it's in areas around in here, and I do have the lot and concession number, more things for me to look at. Well, the war starts, and I'm not going to go through each one of these, but the war starts and Caldwell thinks he's going to start something like the Western Rangers, and that's what they're called. Caldwell's Rangers, after their commander, a noted loyalist and Indian trader, William Caldwell. The unit was rather a small one, probably not more than 50, nominally organized into 2 companies. Interesting fact here, one of them was French speaking, the other was English speaking. And I guess you just go down to practicality, you wouldn't want your English speaking sergeant giving commands and half of your guys are French and don't know what you're saying, or vice versa. So that's why they made the division. And again, you need to remember the history of Essex County. It was a strong French presence before the English even came later on. So they also worked a lot with the natives, and they helped them out a lot. The unit, or parts of it, fought in the battles of Moraviantown, Longwoods, Lundy's Lane, and several other actions in the Niagara Peninsula. The Rangers recruited from Essex, and they were enrolled into the militia, but were not permitted to quit the service at their leisure, as sedimentary militia could do. The Loyal Essex Volunteers was another militia company, sometimes called the Essex Rangers, and they were in the county about in March of 14. And this unit continued on to end up being the Canadian Army, the Essex and the Kent Scottish Regiment, that's still going today. So in late 1813, the American captured Amherstburg. The defeated and retreating British Army under Proctor, they left the area. And until the end of the war, there was only small outposts of British regulars that were stationed in the Western District of Kent, Essex, and Norfolk. And during 1814, American troops made several raids from Detroit on Lake Erie against those, causing much destruction, and that's where a lot of these war claims come in. Local militia could not stop a determined expedition, for example, that which resulted in the Battle of Malcolm Mills, but they could stop small-scale nuisance raids. And the next quote here is rather interesting. The volunteer units from the militia, styling themselves for the example of the Essex Volunteers, provided useful intelligence through the later period of the war. So that's kind of interesting. They basically went down there and found out what the Americans were doing. Because Proctor and everybody else in the 1st Essex Flank Company, they retreated back to Burlington Heights. And they were hanging out there along with the 2nd York and the 5th Lincoln. That's where they all mustered at the same spot. And there was a lot of intermingling of the troops. You know, and somebody said, you know, they needed 12 guys to take some prisoners to York. Who wants to do it? Well, certain people would want to do that, especially when they know that the next on the list is we want, you know, 200 to go fight at Lundy's Lane in a battle against the Americans. So, you know, you may want to get your time in, depending on the degree of your loyalty or, you know, what you want to think about it. So the 2nd York comes in, and he's only there for one time. So he starts off in July. The war started again in June of 12. So he didn't get the first muster roll, but he's in on the 2nd, and he works out for a month. He works out for the next month, but he isn't working that fall. I'll go into later the battles that I think he fought in. He could have fought in the capturing of Detroit. The reading that I've done, they had to have so many people stay back at the Fort Malden just to make sure that everybody wasn't gone so that the Americans would come around and burn the fort when nobody was home. You know, did he get stuck with that duty? Other people also realized that everybody who fought in the capturing of Detroit, big rah-rah, everybody got the medal. Well, not everybody got the medal, and that list is incomplete, and most academics are in agreement there that they know that's not everybody. So he might have been fighting, and he never got credit for it. As many of you in the room know, you do your best work between 12 and 2 in the morning when you keep thinking you should be in bed. And one of those times, I finally found one, and it was a sort of a late find, was this one. And he's wounded in the Battle of Raisin River. So the thing that happens at Raisin River is they cross the river and they sneak up going along the frozen ice. So you start thinking about how comfortable that would be fighting in January of 13. And there were written reports where some of the guys got hurt because they slipped and fell on the ice even before the battle started. Well, he ends up being one of 4 people that's recorded as wounded at Raisin River. And this was a very bloody battle, and it was one of those cases where the battle happened. They captured a lot of Americans. Some of them were wounded and some of them weren't. And we'll use the words, the natives that helped them win the battle to that point had a different view as to what should happen to prisoners than what the Canadians thought should happen to the prisoners. And they intervened too late. And so the Americans used this as, remember the raisin, as a sort of a battle cry, like we got to go get them now because of what they did to us there. The only time he serves for, the only time he serves at the 2nd York is this one stint after he gets wounded. I'm going to make the projection that I don't know how bad he got wounded. Unfortunately, that wasn't recorded. But he goes back to this area because that's where Barton Township is, that's where Dad is, that's where everybody else is. It's a whole lot safer than being in Essex, and if he has to recover, and then when he does start to serve, he does one stint with the 2nd York with some of the guys that would have lived in Trafalgar where he left 3-4 years ago. He also serves with Captain Samuel Reitman, who lives around the corner from Daniel Young, his dad, Peter's dad. And later on, Samuel Reitman will be one of the witnesses to Daniel Young's last will. So they were good friends. So you might as well have Peter serve with your best friend. Now he is a private this time. All the other times he's a sergeant. And you see he's a sergeant with Caldwell. And he continues on Essex Rangers, but it's being the same as the 1st Flank Company. And then something happens right here. I don't know what. I can only make some conjectures. On the 25th of July, he switches from a sergeant to a private. Did he get demoted? Did he say, the heck with this? He fought in a number of battles, or he could have, because he was working during the same time that his unit was in battles. We don't know that he fought in the battle, because unfortunately, the muster rolls just say that he worked. It doesn't say what happened, or where they did things. Every once in a while, let's say, taking prisoners to here, getting food from here, but most of the time it just gives that they worked. And you have to remember a lot of the muster rolls were created years after, and that's the best they could do, is to figure out who was working when. The 25th of July, when he starts as a private, that's when his unit was involved in the Battle of Lundy's Lane, which was not a very nice place to end up having to be in a battle. And another relative might throw out the idea, did he just post-traumatic stress? Like, I don't want to lead these guys. I just saw my last group get butchered. Who knows? Somehow he's a private. He continues to be a private. And when I was researching these, I thought, okay, the War of 1812 to 14. I was amazed that he was still working in the march. But then again, it took a long time for the rules, for the order to finally get out to the country that, hey, the war is done. So he served at least 397 days. This is Caldwell's company when they're doing the Battle of Raisin River. And these are the guys that got wounded. And next one is Peter getting wounded, and wounded at River Raisin. And if they hadn't put those wounded guys in, I wouldn't have known what he was doing during that section. That's the only thing that leads you to believe that that's what's happening. Okay, everybody that was in the Flank Company, they needed to prove that they were in the Flank Company to get the free land. And luckily, through a research friend of my son's, I got all the Young's research, all the Young certificate Bs. And so this is the actual paper that the guy took a digital copy of it for me. And there's the Library and Archives Canada wooden tables, similar to this, that he took the picture on. So he's Peter Young, and he's in the regiment of the Flank Company. And again, it was William Caldwell. And yes, I'm saying he did this, and again, it's 1820 is when they're filling out this piece of paper to say, yeah, you need this, I'll vouch for you, you were there, now you go and get your land claim. The other thing that happened in this war, yeah, it was great to get the land claim. 1920, he starts the process, and I've traced it to about early 1840s is when he finally gets paid for it. And I think at this point his estate got paid for it, and if I say the estate, then it's happened after 1846 when Peter dies. So he never really gets the land. Bureaucracy, that sounds familiar. Well, it was going strong then too. And the war claim, you know, they wanted to help everybody out and say, you know, it wasn't your fault that your place got burned down because of the war. Yes, we will reimburse you. Well, the reality was, in the mid-1820s, he gets reimbursed. 25 cents on the dollar for what he was originally, what his claim is for. So, you know, there's been some talk after this Remembrance Day about how we treat our veterans now. Well, they didn't do such a great job back then either. And this is one of the things that gives me more faith that I was actually got the right Peter Young. On the top of the screen, I'm not sure if I can't do a Control Plus to make it bigger, right? It doesn't work on the screens. I don't think so. So the top is his land claim, his signature. And the bottom is his signature, or I got them switched. I think the top is the war claim. In 1815, he made the claim for the stuff they did in May of 14. And the bottom is 1806 to get his UEL grant. And in my world, that's close enough to being the same. The other thing that I also find interesting is 1806, he knows enough to write his name. And that puts himself in a certain class, I think, at that point, too. I might go back to the point that his father, Daniel, was one of the people who started the Masons in Hamilton. And it would be my belief and interest that if you're believing in the Masons and all the stuff that they were doing, you educated yourself. You made yourself a little more educated and stressed that more. And if it wasn't for these signatures, it wouldn't help my claim too much. So Peter Young, in the 1830s, he leaves Colchester and he ends up going back to Seneca Township, near where the Youngs still had land. And he goes back at an opportune time because the Youngs are settling a land grant, a land claim dispute with another name, Weir, if any of you know that area. W-E-I-R is the last name. And basically what happened is Adam Young, the grandfather's grandmother, gave some of the land that the natives gave to Adam Young to the Weir family. Well, that's what the Weirs said. And later generations of the Youngs didn't think it actually happened. So there's this big dispute and lots of court papers and stuff. And Adam's long gone. His wife, Elizabeth Windecker Young, is long dead. And by this time, Daniel is dead, and some of the sons are dead. So now it's the grandchildren that are going to make out some free land here if it happens. And it just happens to be the same time period that Peter comes back into that area. Peter dies in 46, and this gravestone that's in the Caledonia Old Methodist Cemetery 2-3 years ago was in the several pieces like it is now over in the brush on the fence line. And I knew it was there because another young researcher said it was in the brush, and they were hoping they could do something with it. There were others that were just in piles, because when they eventually went to clean up the cemetery, all the ones that were sort of broken and whatever, well, we'll throw them all over to the side, and then we can get our lawnmowers in and do it a lot faster. And there's a group called the Grace United Church. They've worked and done some restoration. And Joe, I sent you a picture of this earlier. It's very crude, it's very economical, but it's a heck of a lot better than being in the fence line in the brush. It's 2x8s or 2x10s filled with pea gravel, and the stones are put back together, and at least it looks like that. Another little twist of events here. I guess I'm very glad that Peter and his wife Hannah are buried here. In 73 she dies, and their son Peter, who dies in 75, all are in the same stone. If Peter had a stone on his own, dying in 1846, would I even have a stone anywhere? Would it have been this big? It might have been one of those other stones that many of you know. You see the shape, but you can't read anything on it anymore. So maybe it's a good thing that he's with his son and his wife, because we at least have this. So that brings us to the graveside marker project, and there it is. You've got it on the handout. I'm going to just briefly go through this. So in my conversations with the lady who answers your questions, who is this group that thought it was important enough to do this? If you've been following this, the Canadian government was going to do a great big, finally give these veterans what they deserve. And what ended up happening, in my mind, is they gave out a lot of money to do stuff that would bring in tourists and reenactments and all that kind of stuff. But something like this that'll go on many years in the future, that was a different story. They were actually turned down the first time when they presented this. The Historic Military Establishment of Upper Canada is a group of individuals who create the rich naval and military history of Upper Canada from 1750 to 1880. They take part in many educational and public events, in addition to coordinating and participating in living history and battle reenactments across North America. The Canadian government has provided funding of $140,000 through Canada's Heritage 1812 Commemorative Fund. The fund supports community-based projects to foster greater awareness and understanding of this important conflict. So that's who they are, and that's how they got them. They got it. And Lynn ended up saying that she was very pleased that the federal government sees it fits to supply funding for this most worthwhile project. And it's because of that government money that they're able to do it at all. So when we look at the website, there's going to be 6 parts. There's the home page, search for a veteran, and those are the veterans that have already put in the paperwork like Peter has. Location of the grave sites, we got a picture of Ontario, well actually Canada, because there is one grave in Halifax that's part of this. War of 1812 timeline. It used to take you to all the different skirmishes and stuff of the war. However, when I emailed the tech guy the other day, I said, hey, when I tried this, it keeps saying that basically where this site was redirecting me to, that site doesn't exist anymore. And the guy goes, oh, yes, that is the problem. I've been trying to solve it. Basically, we linked to another government site, and now that the War of 1812 celebrations are done, that site's taken off the internet, so you don't have it anymore. Applying for graveside marker, and then there is a part where you can contact them. One of the big things that they want, and it's a requirement that you're by honor bound to do, when you present the plaque to the grave site, they want a ceremony and they want press there. And I think you'll recognize our 2 branch members here. This was of a celebration in the fall of 1813, where they we're presenting one of these markers. So you apply for gravesite marker. The process is, number one, you create an account. All you have to do is put in your name and put in a password. And what that basically does, it just gives you your folder in this big site. And they know who's doing what with it. And this site also has 27 links are given. I put that in the handout when you get on this site. And unfortunately, you have to create an account before you can get to those links. But I think with those names, you can probably do a Google search and get into the sites anyhow. There's the important information section, which talks about, first, look through the list of veterans. They don't want you doing it all, and then they look and they say, sorry, but that guy's already done. And you wasted all that time. There's a biography that you can put in up to 1,600 words or less. There's a biography to show that the veteran's part in building the country. In Peter's case, there wasn't a lot of evidence that I had about great things that he did to improve Seneca Township. It was more or less just what he did and some of the things that he went through being a soldier in the war. What you can expect. You fill in the application details to the best of your ability with your proof documents. And the hardest part for me in doing a lot of this, because the research had been done over 3 years, was the technical part. You can have 3 support files that have to be under a certain number of megapixels. So you know, if you got something, you've got to make sure that it's not larger than that, or it'll kick it out of their system, because they don't have an endless amount of storage space for the stuff. The other part that was hardest for me was they wanted your biography to fit in the space they had. And it has to be so many characters. And it has to be so many characters. They give you a character count. But when you put your words into the character count, because of some computer lingo, all of a sudden where you have quotation marks, you have asterisks. So maybe some of you ran into that before, where you have to go through and change all the quotation marks to get rid of that and to put it in. So that was the hardest part for me. They will accept your application if they don't tell you what their criteria is. A young researcher, when I sent another information from another veteran on here, he wrote back and he said, they got the wrong dates. They got whatever. You know, it doesn't match with my research. And you know, they said he only had 3 sons. Well, I think he had 6 sons. And I do not think they have the research staff to say nitpick, but to go through everything. If you say Peter Young and you show a war muster roll record that says Peter Young, they're going to say, okay, that's good enough. We're not going to dispute. Give us more proof that he is the right Peter Young. If they deny you, they will tell you it's because of A, B, and C. And they're quite clear that if you just say, well, they denied me, wow, maybe they didn't read it right. I'm just going to send it back in. They are very clear that, no, if you do that, they basically say, there's your second chance. You got one more chance. And if you think you're just going to throw it back to us, then we'll say denied, and then your John Henry cannot get a veteran plaque. So it's like, you know, if you're serious about this, you're not going to just try to bluff them, so to speak. The other thing is you have to pay, it's roughly around $20 to ship the thing to you once you're approved. Terms and condition, they're willing to work with First Nations people to honor their veterans, and they realize the written records aren't there. Your research will be their property, so what I've given them is up on their site. I think that's their way of getting around, like, don't try to sue us later because we're doing stuff with what you've made. and only graves in Canada can qualify at this time. So if you can work your magic, Steve. And this is, pardon?
That site?
Yeah, that site.
Run
And if it isn't,
I worked my magic all right. Hit the off button.
yeah. Any questions? Good time. Yes?
Bill, I was down in Essex County for a couple of years, many years ago, but is Raisin River in Essex County?
Excellent question. No, Raisin River is in Michigan, Monroe, Michigan. They had to cross the river, get into what is now the United States, and fight them there. And there were a couple of rivers there where they had a lot of skirmishes between the Americans and the Canadians. They actually still have every January 2018 to 22, they do have a reenactment and a commemoration of that battle every year. Good, excellent.
You've got to control it.
Yep. Okay. So, I'll ignore you and try to see what I can. Okay. So, search for a vet is one spot here. You can go through. I would just do this, and because of time, I've gone on too long. I'm just going to go down to Beamer, Benner. That's what I want. Okay, so some of you may be related to some Benners in Fort Erie. So here's Jacob Benner. He's part of where he is buried, and then the unit that he's with. Another question somebody might ask me is, do you have to know where he's buried to get one of these? That was a question they never answered me back. Because there's one guy in here who does not have a cemetery listed. And I'm going, well, if he didn't have a cemetery listed, but he's been approved, where'd the stone go? Because I'm in that situation with Daniel Young. We do not definitively know what cemetery of these probable 3 he's buried in. But I do have a solution as to where it would be a fitting place to put this marker. But again, no answers been back to me yet. So here's Jacob Benner. All of these guys, you can get on. You don't have to register for the set for it, and click. And then here's the photographs. Part of yes, I will do this is that you will have a press release. You will get press to cover the actual ceremony, and you are by honor bound to send them 3 photographs within a certain pixel range, and again file size, so they can put up on this. And basically, they don't want to give it to you and then it ends up in your closet. You know, they want it on the grave. And so in this case, he's veteran 248, and family member, no. I'm not sure what that means. It might have been a relative. Like I would be a relative of Peter. He's a brother to Philip, relation to other vet ID, because he's next down on that list. Where he was born in Dutchess County, New York, where he died, and location of the grave. And this is basically stuff that you need to fill in. This is all stuff that somebody has filled in on the veteran. So this is what you have to fill in to the best of your ability. And the place of death, location of the grave, reason for death. Most of them are unknown, or in my case I just said old age. I had no idea how he died. There wasn't a death certificate with a reason. The date of his death and the rank, his regiment, officer that he reported to, and then it goes into his biography and talks about where he is. And I believe this is one of the ones that the Sharon Dell and her group, the Heritage Group, put together. Mine is a lot longer on Peter. Some You know, if you're sitting there going, well, I know so-and-so did, but I don't know much about him. Some only have like 4 lines in here. I was quite disappointed, and if he's a, you know, this guy's a relative, you go, oh great, what am I going to find out? And you get there and there's almost nothing. So that's that part. And now I'm going to go back. Okay, search for that. Look at the location of the grave sites. There they are. And then if you click on here, it'll say that it's St. Peter's Anglican Chapel Cemetery. And in this case, it was a British soldier. I forget his name. I did look into him. There are some here. And then for humor's sake, there's one of these when I messed up the scale in the Ukraine. But when I put my cursor over it, it didn't say what cemetery, so I don't know whether it's, I'm assuming it's a flaw in their, in the site. The timeline will show you that it doesn't work. Okay? I hope that didn't screw me up,
No,
Steve.
just the tab at the top. Go to the other tab.
That one?
Close that, yep. X on that.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's very nice. Okay, applying for graveside marker, and here's where you have to give away your life. And I'm only doing this so that you can see the next part of it. And okay. Okay, so I hope there. And if this doesn't work, then I can just bluff it. And actually here, I think there's a space I put in. Let's do it again. Okay, please. Okay, so you get to this next screen, and it welcomes me, and new changes on the site. One of my emails the other night from the techie guy said, oh, you'll be one of the first to know that we are going to put up a video, a YouTube video, on how to do all this. So that'll help you if you're into that. What you can expect, it goes through all the mumbo jumbo. Suggested references are all the ones that I have there. There's a cazoodle of those. And it talks about suggestion to put the marker, again, really simplistic, how to glue it, and then they get a paving stone, and not too high tech on what they're doing there. And to go back, I hope that'll do it. Okay, I'm not going to go through the rest of them. But basically that's where it is. You have to fill out the application. All those headings that I went through for Benner is what you have to produce the best that you can. And when it's all said and done, eventually something like this arrives in your mailbox, and you're quite impressed. And I'm glad to share this with people who would appreciate it. Yeah. So, any questions? Go ahead, Morris.
Well, are you supposed to somehow or other attach this to the gravestone, or what are you supposed to do?
Yes. Okay, I showed how in some cases they have it glued to a paving stone, and then that paving stone is then placed in the soil in front of the marker. In Peter's case, I think what I'll be doing is, I've already been in conversation with the Grace United people who've made the frame. I think we'll extend the frame a little bit longer and then try to do some theft preventative measures of gluing it to the frame or doing some stuff like that. Because I am cognizant that somebody's thinking, boy, that'd look nice in my bedroom. And in a lot of cases, Maurice, if there's space on the actual tombstone, they'll fix it right to it. Put the epoxy on here and put it right on.
They did them at Hillside, and what they did was they put it in a paving stone and put them right in front of them,
Yeah.
in the ground, in a paving stone.
Yeah, and
The ones at
even
Hillside, so.
even there, like, you know, I guess you have to trust people that they don't come around with well, they don't even need a shovel.
Well, it's a big cement, big cement block. So
A big cement block, that's how they got around it.
pretty much.
Not just
Not just a paver.
not just a paver.
They basically laid a cement block that they would put a headstone on.
Yeah, oh, one of those. Yeah, and that's where you run into the expense of the whole thing, right? The Anglican Church, I'm going to say St. Andrews, correct me please if I'm wrong, on the River Parkway in Fort Erie, the old Anglican Church there. Anybody know the right name? By the train bridges there, right in the bend? Yeah, there's a couple in there, and they put them right on the stone. Yeah,
They fixed them right to the headstone?
yeah. I have
Well,
my working so far. I've done I've had emails with the Haldeman Cemetery people, because again, you're going to have to get cooperation from them. It is their cemetery they have to maintain. Yeah, there's no problem with that. And somewhere it says, you know, within 6 weeks of receiving this, you're supposed to have your ceremony and send them the press pictures. Well, I've written back to them and said, I don't really think, I know that's not going to happen, because right now it's too cold to have any ceremonies out there. For the glue to work, it's just too much hassle. But I have said that there's actually a young family reunion for people who are related to Adam Young, who died in 1790, in Blackheath, which is near Cayuga, Caledonia, in the second Saturday of July. And I've attended that reunion for a couple of years, and the committee is, I'm pretty sure will approve it in February, that this ceremony will be part of the reunion. Because if we get usually 60 to 70 people to a reunion, that would be a great photo op to do it. And you know, they're at least somewhat related to this person. And it would also be like, so you go there and you have a half-an-hour ceremony. Well, in a lot of cases, that's just too far to go for half an hour. But if you're going to go from there 5 minutes and then have the reunion, well, that's a different story. And for those of you who are young relatives, they had a really high turnout the year. They had a historic cairn put up for Adam Young on the side of the river 54, is it? It goes along the river there. And they had like 100 people that year because everybody wanted to come out to see the dedication of this thing. Great.
The church, Anglican church along the river, for years, St. Paul's Anglican, so we transcribed that, and I've been there, sat and just interrupted a bit. It's kind of up in a hill, eh?
Yeah.
It kind of comes down to the river.
Yep.
I mean, it was still over 4 years.
So again, if you were alive and between the ages of 16 and 60 some odd, you had to serve in the militia. So if you had relatives back then, and again, it's the Lincoln militia that you need to keep looking for to find their records. Yeah.
Thank
Good.
you.